Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, March 23rd in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I want to get us set up for what I think might be going on here over the next several weeks by starting off with a map that shows you the last 7 days of temperatures compared to normal. So of course in the last week we saw a pretty sizable Arctic outbreak that made it clear to the southeast and down to the Gulf Coast, and we talked earlier this week about the impacts that had on a deep freeze pretty far into the south. What's happened since then is we've watched the temperatures recover. So I'm recording this late in the afternoon here on Thursday. And what we see right in through this area is a very strong temperature gradient. This is representing a pretty strong front. What's important about the front that you see here is I think we're going to see the atmosphere going back into this configuration multiple times over the next couple of weeks, and possibly even going longer than that. And what it's doing is this. It's producing this boundary right in through here where it's a collision between the flow out of two anticyclones, or two high pressure cells. So one to the north here, and then one large one that extends actually all the way over toward Bermuda and beyond. And so right in through this area is where we're pumping in a lot of Gulf moisture. Any low pressure systems that come out of the four corner states, like the ones that are born in California we saw earlier this week, including the one that produced that large tornado that was down here in LA, this is going to come out and ride on this boundary. And the impact of having this occur is we're going to see severe weather to the south of it, very heavy rains along this boundary, and to the north of it we're going to have drier conditions but colder conditions as well. So right now, if we look at the all hazards weather map as of this evening, let's get an update on this. There we go. We do have a severe thunderstorm watch that extends from this part of Texas through Oklahoma into Arkansas and Missouri, and then a flood watch that goes all beyond this, clear over here to West Virginia. And if you notice the kind of smaller polygons that are within this is areas in which we currently have right now the flood warnings, and then you can see these counties highlighted. That's where there are severe thunderstorm warnings while I'm recording this. We're going to notice that systems will continue to dive down through the west and make this same kind of track over the next, I think, 10 to 15 plus days. And so if we just distill all that down, we're going to end up seeing the maps kind of look like this on repeat. So where we're drier, where the rain shadow off the Rocky Mountains is kind of made larger. So we're talking about the western and high plains. Where we're very wet is through the MidSouth, the Red River Valley, through the Ohio River Valley. We'll have more snow out of these systems to the north. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But it is a bit odd to see that because of the trajectory of these systems, the Carolinas and Virginia, especially North Carolina and Virginia, continue to show up drier on the forecast. There is still more precipitation coming into the west, and the overall temperature pattern that's governing this is going to look something like this. So the European model run at 12Z today, looking out over the next 10 days at average temperature anomalies. I know you see this as all being very warm down here, but this is going to come in pulses out of the south. And so what we got here is a highly, a high gradient of temperature, a large gradient of temperatures, high contrast, that's what I meant to say. And what this is going to do is this is not only going to drive storm systems along this trajectory, but also keep the winds up. North of it quite cold, south of it at times quite warm. Now, putting this all into perspective, we look back over the last 30 days, and so we're going to watch an area in through here continue to increase to get more precipitation. We've had extensive discussions as of late about the snowpack across the northern plains and upper Midwest that extends into southern Canada, including Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and parts of Alberta. A lot of snow on the ground here. Of course, this also adds to the ongoing discussion about the incredibly wet weather in California. We're going to take a look at more systems coming through here. And we know that right now the upper Colorado Basin's got 140+% of normal snowpack on it. But notice what's going on in the plains here. This is an area that continues to be drier along the Gulf Coast. Even though better rains, including severe weather, is expected, especially tomorrow here, we've been drier. Florida, which had been under that large ridge earlier in this 30-day time period, is drier. And I'm getting concerned about why we're seeing such dry conditions show up here in the Carolinas and Virginia. Some stats on this is just looking back over the last 30 days again. We do have places over here along the coastal Carolinas getting into Virginia that are having a top 5, top 3 driest such 30-day time period on record. And we've been extremely wet in the northern plains and Midwest. We've been very wet, as we've been discussing throughout California. I mean, this has been the wettest 30-day time period, again, the 22nd of February through the 23rd of March in the Central Valley of California, part of the San Joaquin Valley here. And it also just shows you the effect of expanding that rain shadow. So into Kansas, out of eastern Colorado, again, down into the panhandles in Texas. This has been an area that's just been dry. And you can almost see the same pattern that's here in this map shown on the latest drought monitor, which was released this morning. I'm talking about this right in through here. If you drive west-east across Oklahoma, it almost feels as though you're going from two entirely different climate regimes right now, given how wet it is on the eastern side versus being so dry on the other side. We have seen this map, again, just to give you that statistic, we've watched total drought area in the lower 48 go from 86% at the end of last November, beginning of December, now down to being around 50%. But it is anchored, it is firmly anchored in the plains of the United States. All right. Now, looking out there, going beyond this, I'm watching for changes in the Pacific jet. We talked earlier this week about what it would take to break the United States over into a warmer pattern, to stop this persistence in the flow coming into the west, which is following the stronger winds that are right here on top of that temperature gradient in the Midwest and Mid-South. And as we just play this out, we're looking at the whole globe. What's color-coded is wind speed at the jet stream level. What is persistent in this pattern is that the split is happening, west of a line that you could draw from Hawaii to the Aleutian Islands. It's here. The retracted jet is splitting here. What has happened in several of the recent springs is that this split has happened much closer to the west coast. And instead, the flow is coming back together, and we just see it repeatedly coming back together, a subtropical component and a polar component, and just running across the country like this. And remember, the reason why these winds are fast at this level in the atmosphere is due to the temperature gradient at the surface, which ultimately drives the position and movement of the fronts, which is what gives us the focal point to get air to rise, to either produce heavy rain and snow or to produce severe weather. So this is just kind of building the whole narrative as to why the pattern looks the way it does. Now, importantly, changes in the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, I think, are the strongest teleconnection on this pattern. We've talked quite a bit about what's going on with the MJO sweeping way out here over the last 30 plus days, corresponding to the rapid demise of La Niña. And the MJO even came back over here into the Indian Ocean, where it currently sits just to the west of India, toward Africa, and it's about to crash back into null space. And it's expected to emerge possibly into phases 6 or 7. What will likely happen is it's going to show itself up a little bit in phase 4 or 5, but come back over into this area, phase 6 or 7. To kind of support that idea, I'm looking here, let's go back to it, at this shade of color, this kind of bluish green. And you just kind of see that over the next 15 days, we have a lot of rising motion happening in this vicinity, but possibly ending up somewhere over in here centered on phase 6 as we go forward. Now, why this is so important is in the following weeks, after we get here into the beginning of April, in the weeks that follow, so this is mid-April, if we end up getting a strong MJO signal in phase 5, 6, or 7, this could be the beginning of a pattern change for people east of the Rocky Mountains. And what I mean by that is this. If you look at what happens when you get the MJO in phase 6, you notice that we tend to bring that ridge that had been west of this line dividing Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands and bring it closer to the Gulf of Alaska. So historically, the pattern's kind of dipped here, unfortunately keeping the Pacific Northwest cold, but more ridging happening in this region. There's a problem with this pattern, though. If you bring in large ridges that kind of sit in this area in spring, they tend to open up the Gulf to both heat and moisture and the instability that can come with that, which means this would really excite a pattern that's going to bring in a lot of severe weather, kind of like what we're seeing, right now in terms of severe weather, just a bit farther to the north. But it is warmer. If we dip over into phase 7, you notice that you didn't see much of a change. The problem with this pattern is that it brings in the moisture, keeping things wet, even though more mild across the eastern half of the country. The other aspect of this I don't like is it keeps the Pacific Northwest so cold. And we need to be bringing in heat into the Pacific Northwest. We've got to get that in place there to start this next growing season. So we look at all of that and we say, well, what are the models suggesting? And I'm going to compare the CFSV2 to the European model today. Weeks 1 and week 2. So you see kind of the flashes of the warmer air. I'll just blow it up here so you can see it coming out of the southeast at times. But you notice the incredible contrast, and again, right along that corridor is where we expect the heaviest precipitation to go. And that's what these next two maps, these two maps are suggesting, next 2 weeks. We'll look at those closer in a moment. But notice by week 3 into week 4, the extent of this cooler air is beginning to show some variability and some relaxing. I still think it'll be past the middle of April that we fully start to realize more consistent warmer conditions, getting away from just the southeast and farther into the plains and a bit farther to the north over the Great Lakes or into New England, even though the models aren't fully advertising that yet. This will be critical. Can we fully get about a week or two after the MJO gets into phase 6, the teleconnection to set up to deliver that warmth? Now, the European model, if I just run it from April 8th to May 8th, has continued to advertise the same pattern it's been advertising. And that's what I'm showing you here. If it's got a warm spot, it's in the southern plains, in the central plains. You could say that the model did trend less cold in terms of what we have coming out of the Canadian prairie, across the Midwest, into the Appalachian Mountains, into New England. It's not as cold as it was, but it still anchored the cold throughout the Great Basin and the Rocky Mountains in this pattern. And what it's suggesting is more of this, which is what, well, that may be a little bit too exaggerated, more of that. And what that's doing is on the precipitation side of things, it's just going to continue to keep the same corridors wet. So in through here, coming out of the Red River Valley to south, and this possibly means more snow for the northern plains of the United States. So we can explain this away by looking at the persistence in the current pattern. What I am going to be watching for is a break. I know the models are stuck on persistence with this pattern, but if we do get the MJO to slide back into phase 6 and 7 and we actually get a strong teleconnection with it, in other words, it's really influencing the jet stream coming across the Pacific, we shift a few things around, setting up more of this pattern. This is still a very active pattern, but more mild air begins to show up. And for a lot of folks, that means snowmelt in the north, which unfortunately starts the spring flood fight there. But the earlier we start it, the better, to be honest with you. And then the other thing that this does is continues to keep the severe weather rolling to the south. Okay, let's get here first. I've been asked many times this week about the speed of the transition to El Nino. And what I'd like to make a point is to tell you that over the last about 45 days, we rapidly lost La Niña. Now, the trade winds were the first clue on this, so the ocean temperatures always show up second. But what we've noticed here is that in the last 45 days, the speed at which the La Niña collapsed might be an indication to tell us that within the next 60 to 90 days, we are actually capable of building an El Nino. And I think this will hold true with some of the narrative that I've given you earlier this month about what that might mean for the rest of spring getting into summer. And we're going to continue to keep that narrative going in these next few videos. But to back up that claim, I just want to show you, this is South America on this corner. This would be near Australia, and this is going down. So this is the whole of the Pacific. And what I want you to see is that through February to March, watch all the warm water which had been shoved to the west while all of this upwelling was occurring due to La Niña. The trades let go, and that's just coming back. And what I also look at is the magnitude of the temperature. Because if we have questions as to whether or not this El Nino that's upcoming could be strong, when this surfaces because of that lack of strong trade winds, this is going to look like a pretty powerful El Nino event. I can back that up with the latest data that was put out by the CPC through Columbia University. And what they now show is that by June, July, August, the highest probability, which is over 60%, is to be in El Nino conditions. And to compare that to climatology, normally we only have about a 22-23% chance of being in El Nino in June, July, August. So I understand the models are being very aggressive on this, but there is cause to believe that that could certainly be the case. And all of this discussion comes down to this. I mean, this is the Pacific Ocean right now. These are the trades that for 3 years screamed all the way over here with incredible velocity. They've now backed off. And so as they back off, momentum has been picking up in the jet to the north. And that's what's giving us more of these storm systems that continue to press across the Pacific and interact with the United States. And that's why I've had a narrative that spring is not going to be overly conducive to a lot of people getting a rapid jump start on the growing season for 2023. Now, back to what we're dealing with today. Severe thunderstorms are out right in through this area. We've already got a few of those warned. All of this is severe thunderstorm watch. We've got the flood watch that extends. These storms have been producing a lot of lightning. This is kind of a live look this afternoon at it, where the clusters of these storms are. I'd like to show them to you, though, on satellite in a broader view, just so you can get the extent of the wind shear that is supporting these storms. They're right in through here where they're bubbling up. But as I just play this back, look at this high thin cirrus and just the speed at which they're moving over the central plains into the Midwest. That is the ridge that's out ahead of the deeper trough that has come through the west. What's also unique about this animation is you can see two other components of the flow I want you to really observe. One, you notice that coming up out of Texas and Louisiana, a beautiful cumulus cloud field just bubbling here out ahead of the severe storms we're expecting. And the other component to this is just to once again see the extent of the snow cover that's in the southern parts of the Canadian prairie, extending from Montana into the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP. There's just a lot of snow on the ground in this area. So if I broke down the next 7+ days into a couple of maps, this is the first one we need to talk about. Along that boundary, we could expect to see, if you just kind of match up the colors here, well in excess of 2 to 4 inches of rain in some places, mainly centered from Missouri to southern Illinois to southern Indiana, Ohio. We have a lot of strong to severe storms that'll happen down here in parts of the south, including the Mississippi, lower Mississippi basin into the southeast. You notice those areas that are drier in through here. Also what's coming up out of the desert southwest, getting into Oklahoma and Texas. And we don't see much precipitation coming through this part of the Central Plains. We can also see the drier signal in the Carolinas, but no slowdown at all really in the pattern entering the Pacific Northwest, diving into California with this setup. Now it's less than we saw earlier in the month, but it's not as though it shut itself off just yet. Here's the snow side of it, and what we've got here is the probability of getting at least 3 inches of snow in the next 10 days. We're going to watch later on this week and weekend for a swath right in through this part of Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, getting into the, lower Michigan. Keep an eye out there. There's snow coming into the interior of New England. And these maps, again, don't do justice to what's going on out west. We got to jump this up to like 12 inches so you can see the heaviest snowfall amounts happening in the mountains in the west. Here's 18, so another 1.5 feet possible, high probability in the Sierra Nevada and Southern Cascades. And there we are up to 2 feet. So we're still seeing additional snows hitting, what has already been a season that's provided 200 to 400% of normal snowpack in this area, including records being set in certain places like Tahoe, Mammoth Mountain, these kind of areas. Just as a reminder, this is what our snow water equivalent looks like right now. And I just explained to you the numbers in the west, but where we do expect to see more snow in this area, it's coming on top of an area that's still got 2 to 12 inches of liquid in the snow. And we're going to add more right into this corridor coming up here. So this is all about spring flood issues as the snow begins to melt and what that might mean for field workability. Now, on the severe weather side of it, the Storm Prediction Center has maintained this map today, which once again just shows where we have the risk, and there's already severe thunderstorms going through this area. Tomorrow, on Friday, if you're watching this early Friday morning, it's today, we're going to keep a very close eye as the main front of this system comes right over the lower Mississippi River Valley, where we do expect the potential for strong straight-line winds, large hail, and tornadic thunderstorms. So why is this system so potent? I was looking here at the vorticity maps. Remember, these are spin in the atmosphere. This wave that's coming through here, while it's quite broad and open, it is ejecting very nicely into Missouri and Illinois. And because it's pivoting from kind of a neutral tilt to one that's got negative tilt, there's going to be just a lot of upper level support for rising motion, decompression of the atmosphere, lowering the atmospheric pressure out ahead of this. Now, I'm going to just play this fast forward because I want you to see where the pattern's going. That system moves into the eastern Great Lakes, and we'll just watch what follows it. See this over here next Monday? It's another low that cuts down over California and follows that same trajectory. Did you see that right here? Just watch it again at the end of next week. We're just on a pace of seeing quite frequent storm systems. So let's pick this up at 6 p.m. tonight here on Thursday with the high-res NAM. Already watching the severe thunderstorms here lining up on that stationary boundary. Again, see the high-pressure cell over Minnesota, the one that's out here in the Atlantic, that's the collision zone in between. So playing into the overnight hours tonight, extremely heavy rain in through this area, including more strong to severe storms building down this line overnight tonight, right here. And then as we play into tomorrow morning, there's a second wave of this. So more rain coming back into Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Southern Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, into Kentucky, and even a bit farther to the north. This is 4 p.m. on Friday. We expect the first round of storms after that to cut across the Mississippi, and then there's going to be a second round later that's going to push across the Mississippi River going into the overnight hours. Now, on the back side of this, the models continue to pick up on this snow in eastern Iowa, western Illinois, northwestern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and across Lake Michigan. And going into the day on Saturday, that snow spreads out of that region and just follows the low right over Lake Huron. Now, we already have our next system lined up behind it here, but to show you where that one's going to go, I need to flip over to our comparison between the GFS and the European. So let's just line this up to see there's the heavy rain and the severe weather we're going to watch out on Friday here. We're then going to spread this out to see when that snow could possibly arrive overnight Friday night into Saturday morning. Notice that the GFS has got the snow farther to the east than the European model does. That's an important distinction here right now between the models. But playing this forward, that system pulls into Ontario and Quebec, spreading rain into New England because there's going to be too much mild air. And here's the little wave behind it that spreads possibly some snow coming into Nebraska and Iowa as we work our way into the weekend. Now, after that, we're going to watch the next low coming down the coast of California. Storms sit on the stalled out frontal boundary from the first system that went through. And as we play then into Tuesday and Wednesday, the models are attempting, with the GFS being faster as usual, attempting to build another large storm system in the central United States about a week from now that's going to have very similar characteristics. See it? So that's why I mentioned earlier, I think this pattern's just on this wash, rinse, repeat cycle with what it's up to. I am going to show you the model comparison between total snowfall. Let's blow this up a little bit. Let's play this out with the European model. This is through now Sunday afternoon. We're going to go out a full week on this to see that next system coming down into California. So now we're looking at the snowpack in the west. Heaviest snow is right here around Yellowstone. Still some more snow getting added into the upper Colorado Basin. But the models with that second system, this is the one that comes down early next week, trying to put down, again, another couple of feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada and also the Southern Cascades. The models have been attempting, with the European especially, to hone in on this area with the heaviest snow, but snow's, pretty deep into the interior of New England with this setup. This is the 12Z GFS. So same time frame, different solution, especially on the snows that are coming right in through this part of the Dakotas and Minnesota. The GFS is way more progressive with this system right there. It's faster, so it's actually showing up by next Thursday. That's why you don't see it in the European model. But similar snow swath here, similar for the interior of New England, and there's the snow coming down with the system in between. Also pretty good look here for where I told you what snow was going to be in the west. So there's some good model agreement until you get to about day 6 in the forecast. And so by next Wednesday, we're already seeing them starting to split apart. Now, going out there 10 days, what we are not seeing is any sense of ridging setting up in the midsection of North America. And why I say this is important is if you remember back on Monday, we were looking for any cause to get some mild air in place. But out to April 2nd, it's just not there. The problem is with this pattern is when the models do this, they're going to keep to the south of it wet. So that line is where the models are going to attempt to keep things wettest. So the week 2 forecasts show that. And so we're continuing for the MidSouth to be wet. This will be snow in the north and we're drier in the plains. It's just a pattern that until we get the MJO to really exert its influence when it gets into phase 6 and 7, I don't think we lose this. So translation, it's not just 15 days out that I think we're kind of stuck in this, but we may not be talking about a full shift around in this pattern until mid-April. That's just my assessment today. If that changes, I will tell you as soon as I see evidence to overturn that. But on the temperature side of it, everywhere in gray is where we think a frost could be in the next 7 days. But if we look out there at what this temperature pattern might do, these are high temperatures. We've already seen these today on Thursday. There's Friday's highs getting into Saturday and Sunday. You can just see it, right? There's the boundary. And we go from Sunday into Monday's highs compared to average. Tuesday, the cold air tries to penetrate farther into the southeast. And Wednesday, here just comes the next warm surge ahead of another repeat of the pattern I just showed you. So to make sure you see that, this is a 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies from the European model. So we see the colder fading there. Watch it resurge for the first week of April, like that again, and then the atmosphere beats it back down into the southeast. And we just continue to see this pattern going. We stay cold here. We stay cold in the west. It may not be until we fully get out to that point in mid-April that I see this pattern breaking. Maybe that's too far. I don't know, but that's what I currently think it might be. All right, last couple of things to talk about here. Let's see if we can get this to play for you. This was an animation looking back over the last 7 days of precipitation. What I'm focusing on here is Europe and also down in Argentina. Let's watch Argentina. We've seen multiple rounds of big storms. Look at those right there in Argentina just in the last couple of days. And some of these very large storms have put down hail. They've put down up to 3 to 4 inches of rainfall. And this is coming at the end of such an incredibly dry season for that area. What do we see going forward? Well, let's maybe go back to Europe first. Wetter conditions still across Europe, including the Black Sea region. We're also wet here south of the Yangtze. This was an area I was concerned about drought. Look at the central part of Africa, extremely wet compared to normal. And a big change with repositioning the MJO back into this spot is now we're starting to see wetter conditions in Western Australia, coming through central parts of Australia, including the Northern Territory and also South Australia, and even down here in New South Wales. That's going to be key to watch as well as they're getting ready to plant their fall crops. Elsewhere, back to South America. This has been a signal that's emerged for the last 7 days. Drier in a broad area of Brazil. Not a problem right now. If this persisted, this becomes a problem, but it's not an issue right now. We still have harvest to do and planting to do in parts of Brazil, so this break is not going to be seen as a detriment. Still wet, though, in Argentina into Uruguay. That's continuing. Now, what you need to watch with me about what's going on here in Brazil is if that MJO transition ends up keeping them back into drier conditions. But if it pops back out into phases 6, 7, I'm not worried about that. And neither are the longer range models. This is April 8th to May 8th, looking at average precipitation anomalies for South America. It's actually got wetter signals for most of Brazil's growing areas, except for Paraná, and it's got wetter conditions forecast for Argentina going forward. So that is not an indication of an early shutdown of the Brazilian monsoon. Should anything change my mind about that, I'll be sure to let you know, all right? I appreciate your attention this week. We'll talk to you one last time tomorrow morning. Until then, have a good rest of your day.